Hello, I'm Marcus Idle from Cocho. I'm one of the practice heads at Cocho, dealing with external identity and Azure identity governance. And with me is Serge. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello all. I'm Serge Keremans. I'm part of the strategic alliances team within Saviynt, running the Microsoft business for the EMEA region from a technical perspective.
So today we're going to talk about cloud identity governance. Let's talk about some of the reasons you would need identity governance in your organization. One of our clients is a professional services company. They employed external users to help deliver some of their services. And unfortunately, because they didn't manage the life cycle of those users very well, they ended up with £2.5 million being stolen by one of those users who left their own organization but still had credentials within our client. So the issue they had was unmanaged guest accounts. We've also worked with a manufacturer who had specific auditing requirements, and they weren't auditing the onboarding and life cycle of their external users. So again, they weren't managing their guest accounts properly. They hadn't had a specific issue with stolen credentials or stolen resources, but they needed to keep their auditing up to spec. So how does Azure AD solve this problem? So with Azure AD, you have your organization, and when you want to invite guest users to access resources in your organization, you can bring them in as B2B guest users. The way this works, it's a federated model where in order to sign into your resource, they need to do a sign-in at their own organizational level. Once they've done their own sign-in, a token is sent to your organization, to your Azure Active Directory, and that token is unpacked, and your Active Directory can understand that that user is signed in. So at your directory level, you're controlling access, while in the guest directory, they're still controlling credentials. So this means that in the guest directory, if the user is moved or removed from the directory rather, then they no longer have access to any of your resources because they can't sign in. And sign in is a prerequisite for accessing those resources. In the case of guest organizations who don't have Azure Active Directory, so for example, Google Workspace, the same applies. You just need to federate with those organizations within the back end of Azure AD, and you have exactly the same pattern of credentials in the guest organization and access in the host organization. For smaller external users or external organizations who don't have an identity provider that talks the right protocols, they can use something called one-time passcodes. So for them to receive access, they need to sign in with their email address. They'll receive a one-time passcode that lands in their email inbox. Again, if they've left the organization, they won't have access to that. And that gives them 24 hours of access. So let's talk about onboarding those users. Azure Active Directory also offers something called access packages. They're a collection of resources, so you can have groups, applications, or even SharePoint sites. And you can ask your external users to apply for access. So this is rather than inviting them, they have to go and apply, and then they go through an approval process. So these actually can be members of your organization. They can be guest users who already exist in your organization, and they can be externals, so people who have no relationship already with your organization. They go through an approval process. So this approval can be multi-stage. It can be internal, so it can be a member of your directory doing the approval, or it could even be another external user. So if you have a trusted contact in your external organization, you can get them to manage the approvals for their own users. And during this process, you can also kick off actions. So for example, you can do provisioning, you can create service desk tickets. So you can use these triggers during the access package or entitlement management process to run other processes, depending on how you need the process to work. So that's onboarding via access packages. Once the user has started accessing your resources, what about managing their life cycle? So Azure also offers something called access reviews. So these apply to any group membership or any entitlement, or in other words, access package. And they can go out to a number of different types of people. So this is configurable. You can send them to the group members themselves if you trust them to be able to sort of self-certify that they should still have access. The owners of the group or the access package, or specific named individuals, or even the managers. So depending on the user, it could be different managers who are receiving the access review email. So a review email goes out, and then an action is taken. So if the email is ignored, the action still could be that the person is removed from the group, but this is all configurable. So you can say at the end of the review period, you have a few different outcomes. So you could just report on all of the responses to the access review. You could take action on the approve and deny, or you can take action on approve, deny, or even ignore and kick people out of the group. So together we have an access package which has a number of resources, and then you have an access package request which goes through an approval stage. And then once the user is in, they can be subject to access reviews. The access review goes out to the reviewer who makes a decision. And after that decision, obviously, there's an outcome, which could be that user exits, or it could be that user stays in your organization. And also with access packages, if it's the last access package that user has, you can ensure that they are completely removed from your organization at the point they exit, so at the point they're removed from that access package. So again, that's also configurable. So it's a bit of tidy up there. Azure also offers privileged identity management. So this is where ordinarily you may have a role which entitles you to access various resources, but every now and again you want to do some operation, or your external user wants to do some operation which is maybe more risky, such as managing other users. There are a number of different sort of built-in operations, but you can also add your own, and you can also add things like access to Azure resource groups. So you can make all of these subject to PIM. And what happens in PIM is they have roles that are they're eligible for. So these more risky roles or risky operations, and they need to go into Azure to activate those roles. So they say they have to pick the role, and they say, I want to activate because of X, Y, Z. This is audited, and it can also be subject to approval as well. So there's a number of safeguards, and even if you don't approve, you can make it so that all of the other users eligible for that role get notified that that member has activated that role. So there's a lot of auditing going on. Once you've carried out that role, so that will exist for a certain period of time, and then there's automatic deactivation back to your original status as a normal user. So this is basically countering the idea of accumulated risk. So when people first get access, quite often they're given access to more and more resources or roles, and therefore the risk associated with that user accumulates. If you apply the model of least privileged access, then you start reducing this risk and say, well, you only get the privileges that are associated with your current role, and some of them are even privileges that you need to apply for using PIM. So this is called just-in-time activation. So again, as an administrator, you can see which users have access to those privileged roles. You can create access, and you can enable just-in-time and just enough administrative access. And as I mentioned, you receive reports, not just like an audit report, but a real-time report if people are activating their roles. Something else quite often overlooked is terms of use. So what terms of use does is present a PDF document to the user on first sign-in, and also when anything's changed. So this is particularly applicable to external users who you might want to sign a terms of use before they can access resources in your organization. So what this does for you is obviously reduce your liability, and it creates an audit trail of who's signed off on these terms of use. There are flexible renewal settings, so you can say if the same user starts to access from a different device, then they need to accept the terms of use again. So how do we make use of this? Obviously, if we don't have all of our users working within Azure Active Directory and authenticating to Azure Active Directory, then we don't have the protection that identity governance affords. So the model is to connect your HR system to Azure Active Directory, and if they're connected via Active Directory, then you can use Azure AD Connect to bring them into Azure. And obviously to unify your users to make sure they're in one place, so that when they access your apps and resources, they're going through one doorway in effect, and then you can make sure that access packages, access reviews, PIM, and so on are applied to that one Azure Active Directory. And we can do that with pretty much any application. So there's Azure Marketplace, there's apps in the cloud that are sort of Azure ready, but also with what you might call legacy applications that don't use modern forms of authentication. You can still use gateways such as F5 or Zscaler to enforce an Active Directory sign-in before users start using those applications. And anything you write yourself, anything you write in-house, you can also connect up to as your Active Directory. You just need a very, very simple set of libraries, and there's plenty of patterns available on the Microsoft site to help you do that. So, why Azure Identity Governance? First of all, it removes risk of accumulated access over time, removes risk of privileged access, so continuous privileged access. It helps you rationalize users and groups, particularly with access packages. Gives you time-limited access and helps you manage user life cycles. So that's as far as Azure AD goes. Now we're going to hear a little bit about Saviynt.
Yes, so let's have a little look at what Saviynt can do and how it can implement Azure AD. So first of all, I'll give you some background at where Saviynt basically comes from. And that is that we at some point noticed that companies were going through a digital transformation. And that basically meant that they needed a new way to manage their identities, whether they were human or silicon identities. It's no longer just employees, it's also partners, customers, bots, IoT devices, privileged identities, and whatever type of identity you might think of these days. And then from an asset perspective, we have to protect both the business assets, but also the infrastructure assets, like your data, your healthcare system, your SaaS platforms, and again, any of those assets out there these days. For all of those, we try to answer three simple questions. Who has access to what? Is that being used appropriately? And what does that access really secure? Pretty simple questions to ask, pretty difficult to answer them for a complex organization. And on that note, we try to automate as much as possible to make the identity processes a little bit more efficient and a little less costly. So in this story, Saviynt is our catalyst. It is a single converged platform which consists out of multiple modules, which I will talk about in a later slide. It's built for the cloud, in the cloud, as opposed to a lot of competitors within the IGA markets. We started from the cloud perspective. We didn't make that shift from the on-premise to a cloud solution, which provides a lot of architectural advantages, but it doesn't mean that we neglect the on-premise world. So we can still manage all your on-premise applications as well. And since we have the advantage of being built for the cloud, we are easy to implement and fast to deploy. We are a best-in-class enterprise solution when you look at what the analysts are saying about us in the markets, and let's have a look at that platform. So it currently consists out of 5 modules, and I'll explain these quickly and briefly from a Microsoft perspective. So the middle one is the identity governance one. That's the one that we started with at Saviynt, and it's basically about managing all your identities, providing visibility into who has access to what, automating your lifecycle with join and move and leave a process, having a general access request process for all the applications within the organization, and having the option to do access review for all of those. So we do that for everything within the Microsoft 365 stack, but also for the Microsoft Azure platform itself. If we then move to the left, we start looking at privileged access management. So that's typically where we look at PAM solutions like CyberArk and Thycotic, but from a Microsoft perspective, like Marcus already mentioned, we can actually integrate with Microsoft PIM there and enable it for all applications within the organization again, and also add in capabilities like session recording and over-the-shoulder monitoring, which you expect from a full-blown PAM solution. The most one on the left is third-party access governance. That's where we really try to manage any external type of identities, where we really synergize well with Azure AD, B2B and B2C, and provide governance on top of those solutions. So it's about creating governance flows, managing external companies, giving them the option to have delegated administrators, which can then onboard identities on behalf of those external companies. And then again, having all the IGA capabilities, providing access reviews, providing an access request process for all of those, and providing visibility into who has access to what. When we move over to the right, we start looking at application access governance, and that's where you typically see solutions like SAP GRC, Oracle GRC. From a Microsoft perspective, it's a solution like Dynamics 365 where you need the capabilities of this module. because we offer fine-grained permission management there and also the capabilities to do SOD management and mitigation. Basically making sure that certain combinations of permissions within the organization are not possible to protect your business assets. And then last but not least, on the left, on the right, we have data access governance, and that's where we start looking at your data in platforms like Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, your file servers. Again, provide visibility into who has access to which data is being shared with whom, is that being shared publicly or privately, and what kind of data do we have there? And then again, the IGA capabilities, managing all those accesses. So that is the platform. Let's have a look at why we work together with Microsoft and how we do that. So first of all, at Saviynt, we work together with many departments within Microsoft. First of all, the identity engineering departments, their security product teams, but also with the sales organization. So we partner with them to extend the security capabilities that they already have with their E5 licensing and make those enterprise-wide, helping them transitioning into the cloud. So when you look at Microsoft and Saviynt and you bring those together, you can see that in the market, we are actually stronger than Okta or any other point solutions in that market. But what's very nice, if you actually partner up with Saviynt to cover the more complex scenarios on your identity capabilities, we make sure that we prevent Microsoft 365 stack erosion because we don't have any overlaps with Microsoft. So you actually don't lose the things that you already pay for by taking another solution. And again, that's because we complement their Microsoft security story and we have some of the extensive Microsoft 365 integrations, which I will talk about in the next slides. Let's have a look at Microsoft Azure AD first. So Marcus already gave an explanation about how some of those things work, but you can look at the first part where we have Microsoft, and then you can see that Saviynt doesn't do any authentication at all. So we completely rely on Microsoft for providing those capabilities, which doesn't mean that we don't integrate with them, because we do from a security perspective. So you look at the first part, single sign-in, conditional access, multi-factor authentication. One of the things that Microsoft offers there is Azure AD identity protection. And that's basically a capability that, that creates risk signals when somebody does a suspicious login. And we integrate with that part. So if somebody does a suspicious login through Azure AD, we will automatically get that information, and then we can automatically launch processes within Saviynt that are identity driven. An example could be that you want to fully disable an identity across all platforms and not only the ones connected through Microsoft, or you could actually launch micro recertification looking at the elevated permissions for that identity to reduce the attack surface. And then there are a few things that we've discussed before. So Microsoft is capable of doing user provisioning, access requests, workflows and approvals, access certification, and those kind of things, but they typically are limited to all the solutions that are connected to the Microsoft ecosystem, and they have less flexibility in how you can figure those and match those with your business process. So that's where we take those a little step further. That's where you can see the green pluses. For example, when you start looking at user provisioning, so from a Microsoft perspective, you're rather limited into which application that you can connect to. From a Saviynt perspective, we offer a lot of out-of-the-box connectivity to solutions, but also have generic API connectivity. And then we also even have an RPA bot to mimic actions for really legacy solutions. Likewise, to access certifications, we can have a lot more analytics built into those processes, providing a lot more insights into why you should be granting that access or not, looking at your peers, for example, and comparing which permissions that they have so that we can make the recommendations for the business users to easily make the right decision whether they want to keep or not the permission that they are being asked about. And then we add a few things to the table. Actionable compliance controls, fine-grained entitlement management, entitlement and access risk, and then continuous monitoring enforcement. The most important one for me on this slide is actionable compliance controls, because what you get there is that we offer you a set of KPIs and dashboards showing you the information that you really want to see, because it's completely configurable, but it also allows you to take actions right away. So an example of an actionable compliance control would be that you could start looking into third-party access governance. You could have a KPI there showing you that you have external B2B accounts having administrative permissions into your Azure tenants, which you typically don't want to have. And when you then click on that KPI, it will show your reports with all the accounts and the exact permissions within your Azure tenants. And then it gives you the option to approve those, so you have it from an audit perspective. Or you can also revoke those, which means that we take away those permissions right away and we reduce the risk within the organization. And you also have the option to send it out for further review to someone else, which has more information about it to make the right decision. If you then look at PIM, which was explained already by Marcus, you can see that it works pretty well, especially in the Microsoft ecosystem. But again, at Saviynt, we can extend those capabilities and make it work for any application, and then adding things like I said before, session recording, over-the-shoulder monitoring, keystroke logging, the things that you expect from a full-blown PAM solution like CyberArk or Thycotic in the market. If you look at it from an end user perspective, the process will actually be likewise to what they are doing already within Azure AD PIM. They will still do a privileged access request within the Microsoft portal. They will still get it approved there. But once they get it approved and they want to launch it through the MyAs portal, then Saviynt will actually hop in, provide just-in-time administrative access to that application, and then the capabilities like session recording, over-the-shoulder monitoring again, but it would be seamless for the end user. So let's have a look at how that actually works. There's a little video explaining this exact scenario. So let's have a look at it. So first of all, somebody needs to go to the Microsoft portal and ask for an access package with administrative permissions, which we will do in this case as Robert Thompson. And he will be asking permissions for Salesforce as a system administrator, providing the dates when he needs that permission, and then submitting the request. Then we move over to the administrator or the person having the right permissions to approve that one, again, providing the reasons. And then once we have received all the permissions, we can go to the MyApps portal, and we will see that we actually have an additional button to go through Salesforce through the Saviynt CPAM solution. When we click on this one, we will automatically be logged into that solution with a just-in-time provision account. So we don't know which account, we don't know the password, and that account will be deprovisioned when the session ends, so there is no attack surface left. So now we are making some changes to prove that we are an administrator. And then we move back over to somebody that has the permissions to look at all those sessions. So an administrator, typically, he can log into the CPAM monitor, which brings him into Saviynt as well, in what we call our control center. And there we can have a look at all the currently running PAM sessions or also the history. So when we open one of those sessions, you can see that we have a video there. We can see that we automatically flag certain events happening. And based on what we see there, we could make the decision to remove the access. In some cases, we also have additional options there. And then last but not least, you can have a look at the video to see exactly what happened within that session. So you have a full audit trail of everything that happens through Saviynt. So let's look at the second integration that I was talking about, which we have seen a lot of interest on, and that is integration with Microsoft Identity Protection or Azure AD Identity Protection. So it works in two directions. First of all, when somebody does a suspicious login from Azure AD, we will get that information into Saviynt. And then, like I mentioned before, we can launch any processes, as for example, a micro re-certification, looking at the elevated permissions for that identity, and then remediating those and then updating that information back into Azure AD so we can allow the authentication again. It also works the other way around. So that means if we see something suspicious happening from a Saviynt perspective, for example, somebody doing suspicious things in our CPAM platform, we can notify Azure AD and then it can automatically block the authentication based on the configuration that has been done in Azure AD. So again, let's look at a little example of how that looks in real life. So we'll be looking at Saviynt and we can look at a specific identity where we have some properties that are tied to the integration. And then that person will be doing a suspicious login into Azure AD. So there we go. And this will now be triggering a rule into Azure AD Identity Protection. And there we see a suspicious login. The identity is at risk. And then some process will start triggering automatically. We will send out some emails, but you will see that we automatically get the right information into Saviynt. And that is done by using the logical app designer within Microsoft Azure, providing those details through the REST APIs. And then you see that we get the correct information on the identity. And once we have that, we have some process that launch automatically based on configuration that we have done in Saviynt. So in this case, it's a campaign looking at elevated permissions. So if somebody needs to log in this case, the manager, that will provide recertification. So when you look at a recertification, you will see that we try to provide as much intel as possible to make the right decision. And here you can see that we provide things like look at outlier permissions, look at accounts that have been inactive. Again, making it as easy as possible to make the right decision for the person performing the recertification. And in this case, he's going to take away an administrative permission. And then he's going to accept the other ones. And then we can feed that back into Azure AD so the authentication can be unlocked again. So there we go. This was a really short introduction of what Microsoft and Saviynt does together. There's a lot more to talk about, but we can do that in additional sessions with you, of course. I'll give the word back to Marcus.
Okay, thank you, Serge. So these are some indications. This is not prescriptive in any way, but these are indications of when you should choose either product. So essentially, you should be thinking about using Azure AD Identity Governance. Certainly, if you have more than 100 seats in your organization or within your external users. Certainly, if you need to manage standard access levels across departments, so if you've got some patterns of access that you can replicate there, and if you have external users and you're not very closely managing their life cycles, and so you need to kind of take steps on that. Saviynt is indicated more if you have a slightly larger organization or a larger set of external users. Maybe you have a complex application landscape, including on-prem applications as well. If you want to standardize access across multiple regions, so you have bases in different countries, and you've got you want to make some savings in terms of how you manage access. And certainly, if you're being heavily regulated or audited, it is very useful for that. So if you want to find out more, you want to sort of dig into your specific use case, you can talk to one of our experts, and we can talk to you about Azure AD and Saviynt and all. We'll listen and sort of understand where you are now, what your future goals are, and obviously give you an insight into how we can help address those. So thank you very much for listening, and good luck with your identity governance journey.